This is a 3.8 liter V8 engine with Bosch K Jetronic fuel injection. And there's two things you can look at and spot this very quickly, whether or not your engine has K Jetronic. Number one, it has hard lines going to the fuel injectors, not wires, but metal hard lines going to each fuel injector. And number two, it has a unit right over here that looks like this. And this is called the warm-up regulator. Now, if you heard that term, you would think, well, that's like a choke. It's just going to choke the engine and give it extra gas until the engine starts. Well, if that were true, this thing wouldn't be such a big problem as it's become today because of its age. It's quite complex inside. The first thing I want to point out is related to these two fuel connections here. If you see these, you're going to think, well, that's fuel in, this fuel out, then fuel is going to fill the entire body, but that's not the case. The reason is fuel is isolated in this little cylinder here. This is called a fuel cell, and it looks like this. This is your fuel cell. So fuel comes in here. You can see there's a filter screen down in there, and it exits out here. On the bottom side here is a real thin steel diaphragm that moves up and down. When it moves up, considering how this is positioned on the car, it closes off the passage between these two. When the diaphragm moves down, it opens up the passage between these two fittings. I'm sure the next question is, well, what controls this pin moving up and down? And it has a spring, has two springs, and then this little cover and a little hat in there that holds the pin. So it's a combination of spring pressure and a few things that counterbalance the spring pressure that moves the pin up and down. The first thing is this heating unit that sits inside here. And when the engine's cold, this is down, so it's pushing down on that washer and pushing the pin down. When the engine heats up, this moves up, and the spring pressure allows the pin to come up, closing off the diaphragm, which increases fuel backflow pressure to the metering head. That's one of the most important things inside this unit, is this heating element. The other thing is, on a number, they have a diaphragm located in the bottom unit. There's a diaphragm in here, and that diaphragm moves this little plunger up and down. The springs sit like that. So simply put, there's something else that controls this raising and lowering, and that's vacuum right here. What this does is it enriches the mixture during full throttle operation, because when you get full throttle, you get zero vacuum, and that'll change the diaphragm, and it'll change the position of this pin, which affects fuel pressure. So in conclusion, everything located inside this unit is for the purpose of either increasing or decreasing fuel pressure to the metering head of the fuel distributor. If you can understand this, you can understand how the K-Jet system works. Well, Kent, what's this here? That's not a warm-up regulator. Why doesn't your engine have one of these? Well, I changed it. This is an electronic warm-up regulator that's been developed by a company, and it works amazing. It eliminates some of the problems that you have with these old ones. I put this on this 380SL, and it's absolutely amazing. This thing starts with just a turn of the key, runs down, idles perfectly, accelerates good. Let me start this engine and demonstrate. Notice how smoothly it runs. It's cold, it'll idle down here in a minute, but if you look right here, you can see something going on. Something is pulsating in that electronic were. Right down there, see it? When I saw that, and I realized how well this engine runs, I decided I'm going to call this the Pacemaker. That has to be an appropriate name for this. The Pacemaker. Over here, the fuel distributor is the heart, and this here is what makes it beat. I don't sell this, but you'll find a link in the description below this video that will take you to the company that makes the electronic whirs. Most of you will have this one. This actually controls the mixture of the fuel being delivered through this unit here. And if you know anything about gasoline engines, you have to have a certain ratio fuel to air or the engine won't start. It may not even fire. The fuel-air ratio could be so far off because of failure inside this warm-up regulator that the engine's not going to start. Do you remember when your grade school teacher used to say, hey, put on your thinking cap? Well, let's do that now because we have to think. I have the pressure gauge hooked up in the normal way it's supposed to be hooked up. This section here goes down to the control pressure compensator, and of course this hose comes off the metering head into this valve. And I'm thinking, you know, maybe I could send this back to the fuel tank and use this valve as the regulator or compensator. But I thought, no, I don't need to send it back to the tank. Maybe I can put it in a bottle. So I bled off the pressure here. We're going to take this fitting off. And this fitting is not under pressure. It's just a return line to the tank. But to keep it clean and to stop any fumes from backing up into that line, I'll plug this off. Then I'm going to take this line here. I'll put this weight on it just to keep it inside the bottle. And now we're going to put this in the bottle. This is our fuel tank. Okay, so return fuel to the tank. And we'll put that in there like that. You can see now what's happening is it's coming off the metering head and going to the valve and then going straight into this bottle. So this is going to prove to you that it's a compensator. It's a bleed-off valve. And when it closes down, it sends back pressure back to the metering head, which affects the height of the metering pin. And of course, that affects the fuel-air ratio or the mixture. Okay. So now I've got my jumper on the fuel pump. All right, I'm going to turn the fuel pump on. The valve is closed. There goes the pump. Look at that. Coming right up to 5.2 on system pressure. There's no fuel flow. Everything is pressurizing in the head. Now, if I had a problem here, I had a problem with the fuel pump, you know, I wouldn't be getting 5 bar here. Now watch what happens when I start to open the valve. See it drop? And it'll literally drop to 0 because now, if you look over here, all the fuel is going into the bottle. And if I close this down, look at pressure. So I'm thinking, man, I can start this engine up. I can hold the pressure right there at about 0.7 bar, and just maybe this engine will start. If you recall earlier, I said I was getting a reading of around 2.2 on control pressure with the engine cold. So we're going to set it there and then try to start this engine. Okay, we'll get the pump running. All right, now I'm going to close the valve down until we have about 2.2 right there. Does that sound familiar? I think that happens to a lot of people with these old K-Jet cars that get neglected. So that's kind of the symptom we were having yesterday. It would kind of fire. You could adjust this to your heart's content and nothing would happen. Now I'm going to take and lower this down to 0.7. Okay, let's try it again. Whoa, look at that. That's probably the best it's run. Now watch the gauge as I adjust pressures. I'm going to lower pressure and listen to the engine. Hear that? Now it's getting too rich. Now I'm going to bring it back up. There's one. Now as I increase pressure, the engine's going to start leaning out. And I get up to about 1.5 bar and it quits. Okay, I'm going to come back to 0.8. Okay, let's start it again. Can you believe that? Okay, I've got this car fixed. Now I can just run alongside of it when we're going down the road, and I can just control pressure, but I have to be careful because if I give it too much pressure, it's going to quit. Now I need to clarify here that we're talking about cold control pressure settings. Once this engine warms up, it should go up to about 3 to 3.5. So if I'm going to run alongside the car while the engine's warming up, I'm going to have to be constantly adjusting this. But I wanted to mention that so you understand when we're below 1 bar, that's cold start pressure. And then as the engine warms up, it's going to change the pressure. It's going to gradually start leaning out the mixture as the engine warms. You need to be aware of that. Take a look at over here how much is in the bottle already. So there's quite a bit of return fuel that's going back to the tank when this happens. Okay, let's try it one more time. Usually when you've messed around with things, it may take a while to clean itself out, either build pressure or if you flood it to air it out. But let's see how it starts now. I'm right at 0.9. Wow. Now I'm going to have Jerson go ahead and put it in gear. All right, take it out of gear. Okay, put it in gear. Okay, take it out of gear. So you can see that control pressure can actually affect how this engine idles under load. That was pretty amazing, wasn't it? To actually see that firsthand, how just a slight variation in control pressure can totally mess up how the engine runs. And if it moves more than 0.5 bar, it may not even start, or certainly won't idle right. How do you know whether or not this is bad? That's where a fuel system pressure tester comes in on these engines. I think it's even more important on a K-Jetronic than even a KE-Jetronic. The KE-Jetronic engine has some limp mode features that this engine doesn't have, which will allow you to start the car and to get it to run. But not so with the K-Jet. So if you're having problems getting your old V8 K-Jetronic engine to start, to idle, to run right, to accelerate, you're going to have to do a fuel system pressure test before you spend any money on any parts. Just look at this. It's got to be amazing for the price. You get all these fittings, all these different hoses. Man, what could be better than that? Well, first off, for testing K-Jetronic, you're only going to need about 4 of these fittings, and you're only going to need 1 of these hoses, including the gauge. That's all you're going to need. One of the things that I caution people about when doing these fuel system pressure tests is fuel leaks. You should always have a fire extinguisher handy. You should do this outside because fuel could be squirting out somewhere and it's very dangerous. So I can't stress this enough. The problem with all these that you find online is half of them leak. Along with discovering a lot of these testers had problems with leaks, I also discovered that a lot of them had gauges that weren't accurate. You know, one time I just decided, hey, let's check and see if these gauges are accurate, because when you talk about doing a pressure test, knowing specifically how much pressure should you have as full pressure and control pressure, if you're off 3 or 4 pounds, what good is doing a fuel system pressure test? So it became obvious that manufacturers weren't testing these products, weren't testing these testers. They weren't pressure testing them, they weren't leak testing them, they weren't testing the gauges. These gauges are very fragile. If you bang them around, there's a real fine gear mechanism back here, kind of like a watch. And if they get damaged, they're not going to give you an accurate reading. So a couple years ago, when I set out to provide my customers with a reliable, tested, and accurate pressure tester, I had a number of challenges I had to deal with. The first thing I had to solve was a problem with all the leaking fittings that were showing up on these commercially available testers. That's a threaded fitting there, threaded fitting here, threaded fitting here. They were using some sort of sealant or Loctite during assembly, but they would leak here, and as soon as I would try to fix that leak, they would start leaking out of the wedge fitting here. These weren't clamped enough at the factory. And to make matters worse, look at this. I couldn't believe this. Now, this is the fitting that goes into the fuel distributor, and you're supposed to connect the tester to it here, and you would tighten this down all the way. Can you believe this? Tighten this all down all the way, and look, it's still loose. It wouldn't seat, and even if it would seat, so I was ending up having to cut some of this off, and these fittings would still leak. Now, if you don't think that's bad enough, the other problem was on this quick disconnect that came on most all of these testers. You thought, wow, that's really cool. Let's have a quick disconnect, right? We can just snap this on and snap it off and set the gauge away when we were storing it. Well, the problem is these were leaking because the O-rings inside these quick disconnects were failing. And to continue on, gauges. Having to throw away all kinds of gauges because most of these were anywhere from 3 to 6 psi off. So now you can see the challenges that I was faced with trying to produce a quality, reliable, and leak-free tester. But wait, that wasn't all. You know, these testers have a valve on them, and the testers that were shipped with most of them would leak. They would leak out the fitting here, or they would leak out the top, and you do have to have a good valve if you're going to test Bosch CIS fuel injection. And let's continue. The other fittings in most of these kits were not machined properly. Look at the surface there. See how rough that surface is? Now, this is supposed to seat down when you connect these two fittings together tight to prevent any leaks. So we have to take the fittings and we have to put them in the lathe and machine them in order for them to seal properly against leaks. And instead of O-rings, we provide these aluminum sealing rings so that you can get a tight leak-free seal. I do not like just using O-rings hand tight while doing these fuel system pressure tests. Let me show you how I dealt with all these challenges. I want to start with the fittings, okay? This right here became a critical fitting to source. And I ended up getting these out of Germany because this is a fitting you definitely want to seat against the fittings that go into either the fuel distributor or even the warm-up regulator. Now watch, as I put this in and screw it down, watch where it bottoms out. See, you have a good 1/8 of an inch before that's going to hit. And then you can tighten these down so that the surface in here, which is high quality, you'll not get any leaks out of these fittings. And I also used special clamps and special hose. This is high pressure fuel injection hose to prevent any leaks at each point here. The valve, I sourced a quality valve. It's more expensive, but you can expect this valve to work properly, seal properly, and not leak. And then in the center, I eliminated threaded fittings with this T. There is a threaded fitting here, granted, but I eliminated 2 of them right there. And as far as the quick disconnect, no more quick disconnect. This is removable, but it has to screw down and seal tight like that. That was solved, and then we test these crimps. Each one of these crimps is tested. We have a machine that can re-crimp these if they show any signs of leaking. We pressure test everything under 100 psi in water to make sure there are no leaks. On my deluxe kit, I offer the liquid fill gauge, which is reliable and less prone to damage due to engine vibration or dropping. And then this is the latest modification I've made. I want to make sure the capture bottles are attached. This is a big issue. I can remember one of the first tests I was doing while the engine was running, I accidentally bumped this button and fuel sprayed out all over the engine while the engine was running. So I said, okay, that's an absolute no-no. So we actually attach these before we ship them. When you're all done with the test, you're going to hit this button, release fuel into this bottle before you disconnect this from the engine. So here you can see the latest version of the deluxe tester I offer, and I'm very proud to say we've solved all those issues. And I cannot stress enough that you have to have one of these fuel system pressure testers if you're going to work on these old Mercedes fuel injected engines, particularly the K-Jetronic with the warm-up radiator. That's number one. You'll be chasing your tail forever trying to figure out why your engine doesn't run right if you don't have one of these fuel system pressure testers. And I have full videos in my kit that walk you through the procedures on all these things.